In any case, there is always a form of capture, almost always, when we deal with the l'iMage en cuisine, the image, a form of capture that derives from the play of composed and juxtaposed traits. And this capture, which is, I think, part of the hesitation I'm describing, this capture is never fully dispersed or undone. And it's in part through this suspended and suspending attraction that the distinction of the image is maintained when one passes to the second phase, and what we might call, again, I can't help but think of Heidegger, the moment of truth. But before I make this step, I want to open a parenthesis on the topic of suspension. Because I believe one must recognize that in the element of hesitation, or that the element of hesitation is fundamental for any approach to the image in cuisine. The question, can one eat this, comes back constantly. And this is not only because the dish is often presented as a kind of flower, I'm playing with Nancy here, or in a composition that one hesitates to destroy. It's not simply, is it food? You know, or it's too beautiful to eat. This is, I can't break into this, but there is something else. It's a more fundamental question that I think in some sense we ask all the time. Is this thing to be eaten? Is this edible? Right? The doubt expressed as to the identity of the thing, therefore, is not simply theoretical or not simply a matter of artistic appreciation. Again, is it edible? One won't really know before tasting. And when one introduces into one's mouth a food with which one is not familiar or whose presentation disrupts our conceptual and sensible expectations, or what Nancy describes, I think, quite eloquently in the essay on the Muses, he speaks of a living unity of sensibility. We have a sort of a familiar sensibility which gives us a sense of a unity in our relation to the world. This is disrupted incessantly in a cuisine like this. And when, therefore, our sensible expectations are disrupted, the culinary, or when the culinary habitus is disrupted in this way, one recognizes or one senses that one is courting danger. It's possible that one won't be able to stand the dish or digest it. It's even possible that the thing will kill you. Eating, in this sense, is indeed an experience. A passage, as Heidegger says, by way of a danger. Erfahrung. Is this always the case, perhaps, with the culinary image? And does this image bring forth in this way something fundamental about the act of eating? The ethnologists and the psychoanalysts might have a great deal to tell us about this topic. But without delaying any further over this question of poisoning, and those of you who know me realize this is an important question to me, let me note simply that there was recently in Spain a considerable polemics around this topic in relation to elBulli. One of Adrià's Spanish rivals suggested that the dishes served at the restaurant are effectively dangerous. By technicizing cuisine to this degree, they suggested, one inevitably disrupts the natural nutritive value of the products. One deconstructs not only traditional expectations and the rituals of national and familial communion, one risks denaturing the proper chemical composition of the products. One even risks introducing noxious or toxic agents. Well, the argument, of course, is predictable, and it passes rapidly from the reactionary to the ridiculous. But nevertheless, in its symptomatic character, I think it is revelatory, and it points to a bit of what is involved when you start touching upon taste, you know, when you start fooling with taste in the way that I suggested at the outset. Now, what's fascinating, I think, about this question of the tasting experience, this second moment in its temporality, and the fact that one doesn't know until you've done it, right? You will have already been poisoned when you know that you shouldn't have done it. What's fascinating in this question of the tasting experience is that when one tastes, one knows that if the food is effectively toxic, it is, at least to a certain point, already too late. Thus, this gives a certain intensity to the experience of tasting. And, of course, as you know, the Japanese have explored this rather extensively. But let's pass on now to the various, let's pass now, I told you I was going to have trouble reading. Let's pass now over the various spheres relating to poisoning. without forgetting the enormous question that is opened here concerning the temporality of the act of tasting. For there follows at this moment, which, as I said, one might call the moment of truth, an experience of immense complexity. The questions start to multiply precipitously as one sets out to identify the flavors, examine the textures, and explore the temperatures of what is served, all the while confirming or revising one's expectations and seeking to pass judgment on the thing one is eating. Roland Barthes introduces his essay on Brillat-Savarin by evoking this process, which I have simplified excessively really today, by considering the example of champagne. Commenting on Brillat-Savarin's analysis of champagne, he writes the following, and I have to say this is an incredibly dense passage. It's really quite interesting. It's right near the beginning of Barthes' essay. I spent a half hour talking about this with Henri this morning, who was unable to understand it in French. So translating it was an even bigger task. So my translation will not be adequate, but it's an interesting passage. He says, with regard to this analysis of champagne, here, posed apropos of almost nothing, but taste implies a philosophy of the nothing, one of the most important formal categories of modernity, that of the gradation of phenomena. I'm not happy with that translation. The French is l'échelonnement des phénomènes. It involves a form of time, much less known than rhythm. Interesting to me because I think rhythm is a very important part of what I want to discuss. But less known than rhythm, but present in so many human productions that we would not commit too severe a neologism by designating it, excuse me. Let us call this slide along the ladder, it's really clumsy, and I'm not even sure that's correct, ce décrochage, as he says, this scale of the notes of champagne, a bathmology. Bathmology would be the field of discourses involving a play of degrees. Certain languages are like champagne. They develop a signification after their first hearing, and it is in this withdrawal of sense that literature is born. The gradation of the effects of champagne is crude, entirely physiological, leading from excitation to a form of surfeit. But it is in fact this same principle of the deferring interval in a purified form that regulates the quality of taste. Taste is the very sense that knows and practices multiple and successive apprehensions. The coming on, the withdrawal, overlappings, everything in a counterpoint of sensation to the to the levels of vision correspond the gradations of taste, he says. I urge you to read that in French and forget what I've said in English, but I hope you will retain something of what he says about this play of intervals, of degrees, and also the temporality that is involved in this play of différence that goes on in the process of taste. Now, I believe Jean-Luc must have approved in reading the description of a bathmology that would emphasize degrees, stages, intervals, thresholds, and a play of approach and withdrawal that constitutes a differential play of intensities. The form of the image en cuisine is composed of a visible relief, a visible standing out, accompanied and sometimes modified by an olfactory element, but it does not achieve perfection, as we were talking about entelechy last night, it does not achieve perfection before submitting itself to a kind of analysis that recomposes its play of distinction and without necessarily dissolving or undoing it. The image is recomposed in a series of flavors, perfumes, or notes that differentiate themselves by recalling one another, provoking a play of references based on the knowledge of the gourmet, beginning with a knowledge of tastes, what Adrià calls the chef's palate, and involving at the same time the entire history of cuisine. So there's a knowledge of the gourmet that's involved, but also memories of a more profound order. And here the reference to the Madeleine is inescapable. The culinary image is imagistic in each phase of its formation. But in the second, above all, it plays upon a whole series of references that are both